Who is the biggest troll in history? The guy who opened a fake #1 restaurant in London using Google reviews in his back garden and shared with microwave meals. That was incredible. He also faked his way into Paris fashion show as a designer with knockoff clothes. Then whenever people around the world want to interview him about these things, he sends lookalikes instead. It must be quite exhausting knowing him. Mozart didn't like this singer so much that he wrote a piece for her with high and low notes constantly because he noticed that when she hit low notes her chin went to her chest and when she hit high notes her head would fling back. There was a Prussian, I can't remember his name, who managed to make office a uniform out of scraps of clothing. He used it to convince a few guards on patrol to follow him into a government building. Ordered the arrest of the man in charge. Confiscated all the money personally. Sent the arrested man to Berlin claiming it was all on order of the king. He then ditched the uniformed. Got on a train to Berlin and managed to beat the guards there. He then sat back and watched the absolute confusion happen. The guy was eventually arrested but the public turned him into a celebrity and his actions into a play that was performed all over Germany. He wasn't incarcerated for long and after his release he lived an easy life from there on. In the 30s-40s BBC did an April Fool's broadcast where they told people how spaghetti was made. On trees. They literally showed fake spaghetti trees and since not many people in that time knew how spaghetti was made, lots of people believed it. The old Timmy Nick newspaper The Sun Imo. In the 19th century, they published some articles about the presence of life on the moon like unicorns, winged humans, and other creatures who built temples and lived peacefully. This caused a massive moon craze until it was later outed as fake. Technically this isn't a troll since it was serving a purpose. But Admiral Nelson was escaping a French fleet when a man fell overboard. It was Nelson's policy of never leaving anyone behind so he turned his ship around to go pick him up. The French saw his ship turn back toward them. Assumed he had reinforcements coming beyond the horizon. So they turned and ran. I was thinking more like the mortician who patented the automatic telephone switch 3 years after finding out his rival's wife worked as a telephone operator and would reroute calls asking for his funeral parlor to her husband's. The guy put a whole worldwide workforce out of work for one person's actions. Edit. Didn't George R.R. Martin once say that in the future he would love to get people so immersed in a fantasy world novel and never finish it? Stephen Hawking was in an interview when a cord was unplugged. An alarm went off. This was before he was completely immobile. And he slumped in his chair. The people interviewing him were scared out of their minds. Until they realized that he was alright. And chuckling at his joke. The cord and alarm were for a computer. Eric the Red. He wanted people to come and live in his newfound ice-covered land so he named it Greenland. Marcel Duchamp who, among other fun things, submitted a urinal as an art piece to the Society of Independent Artists under a pseudonym. And then was part of the board that was set to approve pieces. He also spread rumors of another piece he was working on so people wouldn't suspect anything. Love that dude. Plus he sparked an interesting discussion in art. Thank you for the silver. Also would like to mention that as you Tequila McKingbody pointed out, the urinal may have actually been submitted by a woman by the name of Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Leringhoven. And Duchamp acted Marizo as a curator. The more you know. I forget the name but that one guy from the 1800s who bought specific tickets to a play and then gave them away to bald men on the street so that when everyone took their seats and the bald men's heads reflected the light from the stage, they spelled out a scene from the stage. This Chinese general whose city was besieged by a much larger army. So he opened the main gate and sat atop it playing his flute. The enemy thought it was a trap so they packed their stuff and left. Huge Liang. Magnificent bastard was so feared as a strategist and tactician. He was allegedly carried onto the battlefield posthumously. And the opposing army despite knowing he was already dead decided they couldn't take the chance he had some sneaky in the works for them. Edit. Oh. First gold? Thank you. Kind stranger. This is a good week for me. Gillis Corey, a farmer caught up in the Salem witch trials. He was sentenced to pressing, being slowly crushed by stones, to force him to make a plea. Every time he was questioned, he simply said more weight. He died without making a plea. If he pled innocent, they would have convicted him anyway and taken his property from his family. If he pled guilty, they would have convicted him and taken his property from his family. If you don't enter a plea, the court at the time could not exercise jurisdiction over you. That's why courts occasionally tortured people into making a plea. Since he didn't enter a plea, the court couldn't take all his. The dude who somehow got a network news program to say that a plane that crashed was piloted by 4 men with the names Basil Zaharoff, a Greek arms dealer. He once donated a submarine to the Greek government. He then told the Turks that the Greeks had a submarine and sold them 2 submarines. Lastly, he went to the Russians and told them the Turks had 2 submarines, so he sold them 2 as well. None of the submarines actually worked. Asterisk. Edit. Donated to the Greeks. The guy who decided to put an ice troll 3-stroke 4 the way up the path to High Hrothgar. Theodore Roosevelt. He got shot. Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. Michelangelo, without a doubt. This man was hired to paint a chapel and put more dicks and asses on it than you ever did see. Pope. My boy. This is a holy place. Please treat it with the utmost respect. Michelangelo. Whoever decided to delete Club Penguin? Global warming? The guy that sent the first spam email. On the 3rd of May, 1978. Gary Thuk sent the first spam email on ARPANET, marketing the DESA System 20 family of office computers. He succeeded in annoying many people, and the governing authorities even started a crackdown, stating, nobody should be allowed to send a message with a header that long, no matter what it is about. Thuk didn't know it at the time. Russians, and how they continuously retreated when Napoleon tried to attack them, resulting in him giving up due to the situations his army was facing. There is a fountain in Koblenz, Germany, built by a French general in honor of the successful campaign against the Russians, written on the fountain in French. When the Russians defeated Napoleon and came to Koblenz, they saw the fountain. Instead of tearing it down, the Russians added to the text in French. Seen and approved by us. Orson Welles did a radio play that told people the Martians were invading. The next day he told everyone that his play had freaked out millions of people, when it was a few dozen at most. The prophet Elijah heckled the priests of Baal because their god would not set fire to their sacrifice. Ike. The Bible says the priests of Baal prayed all day while Elijah heckled them. Hey, cool sacrifice guys. And by cool, those guys that wrote Kilroy was here during World War II. So a ton of US and British soldiers. They wrote that to tell other allied soldiers that were advancing behind them that hey, we beat you to it. Our unit was first. Kind of thing. Whoever told people to rush Area 51? Don't know if this has been said, but Stalin. He convicted his closest friends of treason, then had them sentenced to death. Later on, they were blindfolded and awaiting the firing squad's bullets. The squad fired blanks. Stalin pulled the blindfolds off and said gotcha. Legend. France building a fake Paris in World War I to confuse German bomber pilots. This will be buried. But Sergei Korolev. The dude was getting frustrated with the Soviet government because they weren't interested in funding his space exploration projects. So he got his propaganda group to publish articles about how Russia was getting close to sending something into space. As expected, the US took the bait and started working on their satellite program. And the Soviet government freaked out when they saw the US doing that. So they funded Korolev's projects. He and his group played them good. George Sarman is a blonde-haired Blue-eyed Frenchman who pretended he a royal from the island of Formosa, now modern-day Taiwan, came up with his own fake religion, diet, and language, with syntax, that he taught in universities across Europe. This was in the 17th century. The guy who faked cancer at our teenagers was a good introduction for young people to the internet. The employee at the Four Seasons landscape that took the reservation for the Trump campaign without asking questions. Clearly they knew it was a mistake. It's not like their company is a well-known place for presidential speeches. Reddit user Miyamoto Musashi, known to be one of the greatest swordsmen in the history of Japan. He had an undefeated dueling record because he would always psych out his opponent. He would show up late to the duels by several hours. Once he even showed up after a night of drinking. D.B. William Horace de Vere Cole. He fooled the British Navy with one of his pranks. The Dreadnought hoax. Virginia Woolf and her brother were involved with that. A bunch of friends dressed in blackface and fake ethnic clothing, pretending to be foreign royalty, and got a tour of the HMS Dreadnought. One acted as the translator while the others talked nonsense to each other and would often excitedly point to something, shout bunga bunga. Full stop. He is also probably the first documented case of the roadwork prank. He put down fake and contradictory construction signs and tied up London traffic for hours. Whoever was responsible for the last season of GOT. Disclaimer. I'm agnostic, so I can't say for sure. But if religion is false, whomever invented religion, making people believe there is life after death and then you die and nothing's there, Andy Kaufman deserves a nod for sure. If you've never seen the videos of him becoming a semi-pro wrestler just so he can taunt Southerners, go look that up. Ken M. Rick Astley put the Rick Roll as his channel intro. The guy who rickrolled Rick Astley himself during his AMA on Reddit. John Hancock. Timothy Dexter. The guy was an idiot. This will prob get buried, but here goes. Whoever came up with the American Armed Forces plan during the Cold War to drop boxes of extra large condoms labeled as medium on the Soviet troops. The result was the Soviets thought the Americans were packing. Greatest military troll of all time. Eric Andre. His antics in public are legendary. Telling the RNC that he wants them to his wife takes some serious cojones. Trump. John McAfee. That guy who created the machine that summoned rain in California and actually got the government to fund him. J.D. McMahon, who reportedly successfully sold investors on blueprints for a 480-inch tall tower in Wichita Falls, Texas, in 1919. The troll was that the investors all assumed it was a 480-foot tall tower, also a building 12 times larger, also, and invested commensurate with that assumption. The thing is, he never lied to those investors. He never verbally claimed the tower would be nearly 500 feet tall. And the blueprints clearly showed the inch mark on every measurement, not the foot mark. He just never corrected their misconceptions and left Texas with the rest of the money after his contractual obligation to build the tower was complete. Leonardo da Vinci. He made almost no actual contributions to science. Everything he discovered and documented in his journals could not be read as they were encoded and mirrored. Much of what he discovered had been rediscovered by the time the books were decoded. Donald Trump. Pope John XXIII. He was Pope during his teenage and late 20s, so naturally we all know that he was kind of an ass. But he was not only an ass, but literally the biggest ass of not giving a. He would do wine and sort debauchery, and literally did not give a about anything that went happened. He was the ruler of papal states until he died. But yeah, John XXIII was not a good pope. If anything, he was the worst pope in the century, but he was literally the physical embodiment of rich and powerful connections. I'm told from the original Mario game. The littler kept telling me Princess Peach is in a different castle. Caligula. Almost everything that's crazy about him is because he trolled the Senate so hard they dragged his legacy through the mud. The man is one of the only emperors to actually invest in Roman infrastructure with Roman money. Read he taxed the Senate class to rebuild public waterways. He was in a mutually contemptuous relationship as emperor. He knew how much power he had and was paranoid enough to not get killed for wielding it. Historians are still untangling what was just Caligula trolls recontextualized for a smear campaign. Herostratus. He burned the temple of Artemis around 400 BC. Just for the lulz and the notoriety apparently. They killed him for it. Painfully. And enacted a law forbidding his name from ever being mentioned. Yet here we are more than 2000 years later. And Herostratus and his stunt is not forgotten. Whoever has been posting the Q drops for the past 4 years. Leroy Jenkins. Whoever started the modern flat earth movement. I'm convinced that guy started it as a joke but it got out of hand. Milli Vanilli. When God told 100-year-old Abraham to go kill his only son and then was like lol psych right before he actually did it. Basil Zaharoff was an arms dealer who managed to sell 5 submarines to 3 different countries. None of the submarines even worked. The trolls in the Hellboy movie that came out last year were surprisingly large. Juan Pujol Garcia. A man in World War II who decided to be a counterintelligence agent against the Nazis. Britain and US rejected his offer. So he did it on his own. Made up an alias as a pro-Nazi Spaniard. Made up a ton of fake agents that the Nazis paid him for. Sent Nazis hunting a bunch of bogus convoys and boats for years. And eventually trolled the Nazi regime so hard he was recruited by the Allied intelligence. Rasputin. The man boned that Serena and then walked off enough cyanide to kill an elephant and a bunch of bullets and only died from drowning. In Soviet Russia you kill cyanide. 2020. Skankland 42. So probably not the biggest. But this one member of the Hellfire Club hid a monkey with a mask in a box and after they finished the demon summoning part of the meeting. Opened it. One member fell to his knees and begged forgiveness and the monkey ended up escaping and causing havoc in a nearby town. Ike. The person behind the Max Headroom incident. L. Sylvia Knight performing for Iceland in Eurovision 2006. I swear legit no one apart from Iceland knew what was going on and why she acted the way she did. Being a complete bitch during interviews and then a ridiculous song plus the stage presence. Sylvia Knight was an over-the-top character from a fake Icelandic reality TV show. So iconic. Probably the one guy who made up the MSG myth that really kicked the ass of all American Chinese joints. How dare you stop the bus to Flavortown? Steve Wilhite. He invented the GIF. Then he won a Webby Award for it. Webby Award speeches are only allowed to be 5 words long. He went up and said it's pronounced GIF. A GIF. Jod himself could come down and tell me that. I wouldn't believe it. It's GIF. Forever. Bye. Whoever put the S in Lisp. I'm convinced that Joyce wrote Finnegan's Wake to troll all the literary scholars. Sacha Baron Cohen. Donald Trump has 100s of millions of people's brains in a pretzel. The man got roasted at a presidential dinner, for good reason, and then decided he was going to run for president to prove everyone wrong. And he actually won. That's some next level trolling. During basic training in 1914 a British soldier was a terrible shot on the rifle range. Could not hit a barn door. Eventually his instructor snapped and shouted, for God's sake go behind that shed over there and shoot yourself. The soldier at once took his rifle and walked off behind the shed. About 30 seconds later the rest of the men hear a single rifle shot. Bloody hell. He's done it, said the instructor. Another 30 seconds pass, then the soldier reappears back from behind the shed and tells the instructor, I tried to shoot myself, Sarge, but I only went and missed again. Andy Kaufman. The person to start the idea of a Rickroll. I have zero clue who it is. But some started an internet trend that truly has stood up to the test of time. Given how often we see things come and go. That's pretty notable.